So, yeah, sorry.
So it's not really textile, is it? It's just you get the image, take the animal away, and you take photos of it as you go around and stuff.
I'll tell you the exact process. It's a lot easier than people think it is. If people knew how easy it was, I'd probably be in trouble. But you get the black and white paper, it develops in the light. So it goes dark in the light. And all of its surface is impregnated with silver halide crystals in a gel. Normally what happens in a darkroom is you take this into a darkroom and you put it under an industrial light, an enlarger, and it flashes light down. But the light only comes from one direction. So if you've got a crystal and you flash light from one direction, you only illuminate one pane. So it's a yes or no thing, binary, 1 or 0, black and white. You end up with a black and white image. But they're crystals in that page. So if you take it outside into the light and you elevate it a bit and you wait for a number of hours to illuminate it from all these directions and the light can come up underneath, you can actually illuminate that crystal from all sides. And when you do that, you create a prism. And the prism can create colour, which is amazing. The other is through humidity. The humidity makes that paper, just because of the chemistry that it's made from, go pink. So you see a lot of pinks in here. That's the humidity. And dryness will make the paper go blue. The base tone in the paper is blue, and so it'll mark in some way, but if it's quite dry, it'll stay blue. And where things press very hard against the paper, it'll go white, because that is the complete absence of light. Now, if I were to do these just as photograms, I'd get my mouse, I'd plonk it down on the paper, and what I'd be left with is a white mouse-shaped blob with just darkness or colour around it. I did a few of those, and I thought, this is going nowhere. Mouse-shaped blob. So then I thought, well, what else marks the paper? Developers mark the paper, so Salt is a developer, or anyone who's ever worked, developing film will know about developers, the old Rodinals and things like that, they mark the paper. But so do the chemicals that potters use in their glazes, like copper chlorides or these kinds of mineral salts. They also mark the page. So I spent a bit of time learning how to mix up developers and getting all my household chemicals together, like turmeric and coffee and tea bags and so on. And then I would take my little mouse, stick with the mouse for now, and then I'd get a fine paintbrush and I'd sit there and I'd paint the mouse, on the mouse. Make sure all the hairs on the mouse were all painted, all the bits that I wanted to come out on the page were all painted, like a potato stamp, in a way. And then I would get a white that's got some detail in it. But after a while, I realised I'm going to need a bit more detail than that. I can't get the fine detail. And you begin, after you've had your first 500 or 600 complete failed prints, you get to know the way in which they fail. And I realised I need more detail around the heads, around the eyes, the bits where you want to sort of, as a human being, that's where you want to connect. You want to look into the face of this portraitised animal. So I started looking into cliché vert, which was a technique used by Man Ray. And what he used to do was he would get a bit of glass and he'd put acrylic paint or something on it and he'd scratch lines in it. And then the light. But the other thing you can do is you can arrange stuff on it, like seed pods or like wax or other things, and the light will be affected by it too, and it can create these quite precise lines. So I started using a little bit of that, and then I thought, you know what, I'm cheating this much already. I've come so far from the idea of the photogram. If I think that at the end it needs a little bit more, I'm going to get out my eyeliner or a crayon or something like that. So it ended up being this combination of essentially photograms, which I really think of more as kind of lumen printing, chemigram, and a chemigram is the bit I was telling you about with the potato stamp thing, because a chemigram is literally a drawing made with chemistry as opposed to paints or another kind of medium, cliché vert, and drawing. And interestingly enough, all of those techniques, with the possible exception of the drawing, and I'd even argue that one, belong firmly in photography. So these are photographs, pure and simple photographs. They're not photographs in the way that we think of photographs now in our Instagram culture, where everything is I'm going to have my camera on rapid burst and take 25,000 photographs of somebody pouting in a mirror, and we'll pick the best of them. Frame, and 90% of them fail. But there's something in the slowness of that I responded to too. You know, we live in this society where we're bombarded with images all the time, and our lives are this kind of succession of images. Every time we do something, we go online and post 25 images of, or someone else does, and we're being tagged and things. And I would bet you that almost none of us go back and look at the same image more than once or twice, you know, and then it's gone in the stream of images that's become our past. You know, the old days of sitting there with a family photo album and looking at the same picture of grandma 25 times because it reminds you of something, they're kind of gone, you know. And for me, I wanted to return to that in some way, this slow image making where I could think about the process. But I still think of it as photography. Yeah.
So you were saying you do all of that on the paper,
yeah,
and then you take a photograph.
No, I don't ever take a photograph. Yeah. It imprints on the page, and what I'm left with is a print. Now, in the original prints, often there's 2 or 3 bits of paper underneath it, because the biggest paper I've got is about that big. Sometimes I create my own emulsion. There's a thing called liquid light, which I love this term, liquid light. And you can paint it onto things, and it behaves pretty much like an emulsion. But often I don't do that. With the really large things I do that, but otherwise I won't. And I'm left with this print on a page. And the thing is, I can't show those prints because they're a biohazard. I never studied chemistry at school, and in retrospect, I probably should have. I have no idea what I'm doing. I think in my defence, had I studied chemistry at school, I never would have tried to do this stuff because I would have realised it was dangerous and done. Yeah. So sometimes it's better to just, you know, walk in ignorantly. But I have created cyanide gas by mistake, and I've burned holes in a metal sink. I have kept, often when I'm working with a new process, I keep a little control jar with some insects in it, and when they die, I keep the gas mask on and go inside and phone my friend who understands chemistry and say, what have I done? No, there were the occasional beetle met an untimely death. Yes, yeah. And of course the pages also, they have a lot of the animal still in them. Sometimes, you know, there are scales or feathers left on them, or sometimes there's blood in them. So they're not the kind of things that I can necessarily show. I did try at one stage sealing some of them with perspex, but it's not a wonderful result. So I then do one high resolution scan, and then they are printed with a very special a process which has been invented by Brian Gilks, who I work with as a master printer in Melbourne. Originally he couldn't print the works. There's a sort of a depth to them and an intensity in the colour that is very difficult to reproduce the normal way. And so he's worked very hard with me over a number of years now to find a method of printing them where they really do look very close to the original print now. I guess if there was a difference, it would only be that sometimes on the original prints, they're a bit water damaged, or you'll see there are bits that sort of protrude a little bit on the surface, whereas on these prints they're quite flat, but otherwise they're very, very similar to that. And then from these original prints, I'll then go in and do things like the gold leaf or so on, and then I'll make limited edition reproduction prints from that one original. So these are these originals that are hanging in the gallery. Yeah.
So what up there, the mouse or rat, mother rat?
Wombat.
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 It's a wombat and a wombat baby.
So the cloudy stuff that's in the top left-hand corner, is that from the chemical imaging or taken from the...
No, well, see what happens sometimes with them, and I think maybe the wombat is a good example. Yes. So the wombat's quite tall. So a lot of the things I do are little, like the little snakes and so on, they don't cast much of a shadow. But the wombat's quite fat, and they actually do cast quite a shadow. And so what you're seeing there is the shadow being cast on one side, and then as the sun moves over to the other side, the shadow casts on the other side. So with the smaller creatures, that doesn't happen so much. And with things like the calf behind you, I knew that it would happen, and I surrounded that calf with wildflowers and it broke up that shadow, so I didn't end up with the same effect. Yeah. But Victoria, who's the sculptor here, that wombat came from her farm and it had a little unborn baby, and so she delivered the baby and then we made the print from the mother and the baby. Mm.
So the wombat, you've got the main image that's looking down towards the baby.
Yeah.
And then if you go from the forehead and curving up to the top right, that's the head of the wombat again?
Yeah, that's the shadow cast by the wombat, from the wombat's fur mostly, and by the bit of its ear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's over the period of time.
Yeah.
It's coming from a different angle.
Yeah.
It's casted in that particular shape.
Yeah, yeah, it often does. There's another one around the, oh, this one here, you see the bit up the side there? That was the same. That cast a shadow, and that's because actually you can't see in the image, but that bird had one wing sticking up, and that wing cast that shadow down. But some in the wombat picture, the bottom part of that, where you've got that sort of band of brushstrokes that the little ones, that I painted that. Yeah. So I actually painted wax on as a resist to prevent the sun from developing those marks. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It becomes like an aura when that shadow's cast around the animals. It's so beautiful. It's like an aura.
Yeah.
And then you're putting your other marks on that feel so heavenly at times. To me, I see them as very much like a celebration of life and a celebration of death, I guess.
Yeah.
So, they're beautiful. We love them.
Well, there's two other things I think are worth mentioning. The first thing is you'll see in a lot of these things a mark like this one that connects the little mouse there to the ground. This is a portrait, by the way, of Marcus Hughes, who's the Director of Indigenous Engagement at the National Library, in the body of a blue mouse. But you'll see it here too with the dotted lines. There are these lines. And what they reflect is this idea that, really most Aboriginal people have, and that most people with Aboriginal ancestry are raised with, this idea that a person is connected to the land by an invisible electric wire, essentially, which can be spoken about like a spider thread, a spider string. We all have this. We have this invisible electric wire that connects us to our country, and that country then can feed us through that electric wire, and we can feed the country through that electric wire. It's a way of showing that we are indivisible from the country. We're not one thing and the country is another. We are a manifestation of country and still connected to country. So then the idea is then when a person passes away or any other life form passes away, they then continue to be connected to the country by that invisible electric wire. So what changes is their materiality, not what they are. What they are remains, no matter what, how many worms happen to be eating whatever's left of them. What they are as a manifestation of country, as a sentence in the communication of country across time and space remains. So that's with those. And the other thing that's worth mentioning is about the shape of the animal, like the aura. There are two ways in which this happens. The first is this one, where it's cast a shadow. But the second is, you'll see in some of them, and we have got a good example right here, but some of the birds around the corner, you'll see it in that. There's a shape of a bird, and then there's another shape of a bird. And then there's the area that's made by the shadow. I took a long time trying to work out what the hell that was. If I get a seed pod, and it's the same shape and weight as a sparrow, and I get a sparrow, and I put them on the paper, the light will treat them completely differently, but only for 4 weeks. And after that time, it treats the sparrow like the seed pod. In other words, I'll get one sparrow, but I'll get 2 sparrows for about 4 weeks. And this is, you can replicate this ad infinitum, and you'll always get that result. So I thought for a while, okay, it's got to be because the gases are coming out from the bird, and that's. But then, of course, the gases don't come out of a bird for 4 weeks. They come out for a few hours, or they come out for at the most a day, and then that bird is dry. But if you take that bird and you put it there dry, you're still not going to get the best artistic result, but you will still get that kind of difference where you've got these two different things. There must be something in the chemistry that causes it to happen, but I thought it was a beautiful metaphor too for the way that we think about these things, that there's this period where a living person or a fox or, one of our many sentient brothers and sisters has passed away, and they are no longer living in the same way that they were before, but they're no longer completely gone either. And there's this kind of window of transition. And I think of these portraits really as being portraits of living beings in transition. They're not yet what they're going to be, and they're no longer what they were, and they're in this kind of, pure state where they're still attached by that invisible electric wire to the ground, and force can still come through them to the ground, and it's that kind of mystery, that mystery world where when you see the 60 Minutes expose on somebody who died on the operating table and saw the great white light, and everybody has that fascination with that, Everybody, no matter how stoic they are, carries with them that kind of apprehension about their own deaths. But I do think that looking at those things in the eye, that can be a genuine source of power that has been taken from us as a people. And it hasn't been taken from all peoples, interestingly. There are many peoples on this earth that still have a very healthy and direct relationship with death. But in the dominant culture of this nation and nations like ours, people have been disempowered by the fact that we have rules and regulations in place now that forcibly remove us from death. For example, I can take, and I have in almost every case here, I can take a dead rabbit or a stillborn cow, and I can wrap that creature in paper bark, and I can bury it in a hollow tree. But I can't do that for my mum. The law says she has to go into a box and go behind a curtain at a crematorium. And the time I spend with her and the nature of that time is limited by laws that have been passed. And yet, a brown snake, the brown snake is entitled to far more care and far more, of a poetic approach to their death than a human being is. And this, I think, that we don't necessarily have the power to combat those laws, and perhaps those laws don't really matter. But what we can combat in ourselves is that loss of power and loss of autonomy where it comes to looking at the deaths of people and the deaths of other lives around us.